Hey everybody, welcome to Redeemer for this Wednesday reflection. Today I want to talk to you about failure. Yeah! Alright. No, seriously, this is a more casual and less structured Wednesday reflection. And it's just mostly, really just my kind of spur of the moment reflection on something I've been thinking about a few days. I'm not talking about like a particular saint day that's on the calendar or a particular observance that we're going to be doing. No, I'm just going to be talking about me being bad at my Lenten discipline. So part of this is confessional to make me feel better, but also to just maybe check in with you. Maybe you hear something about what I'm saying and it resonates with where you're finding yourself. Just to kind of back up, my Lenten discipline this year was to double down and focus on my podcast, The Church Nerd. It's a ministry or an outreach or a teaching tool that I started in seminary as a creative outlet. I needed a creative outlet that wasn't academic, that wasn't writing papers, and it gave me a reason to explore questions I was already having. The problem with seminary is that you are reading a bunch of great stuff, or you're introduced to these great ideas, or maybe a historical concept, and you want to really look more into that. But that's not what your assignment is. That's not what your paper is supposed to be on. That's not what your journal entry is supposed to be on. And so you have to kind of put that question away and write the thing that's being graded. And so my podcast I started was a way to have a reason to not only dig into the questions that I was having that I wanted to explore, but also, truth be told, it was a really fancy, nice, presentable way to procrastinate and not get other work done. If I was dreading writing a paper, I could say, well, but I do need to, work on that latest podcast episode, so I should probably do that tonight instead. And so it was a way to sort of check my email, but not actually check my email, creating some fun creative content. Anyway, and so I thought, oh, well, when I graduate and start working in ministry full time, my calendar is going to be so much more open and available to me, and I can choose how I spend my nights or my in-between time. I could make podcast episodes all the time. That turned out not to be the truth. The pandemic really just drained all of the energy I had from anything like that. Even though, in a lot of ways, the pandemic gave me the desk time to come up with tons of content. If anything, the pandemic was the perfect reason to not go out in the wider world, but stay inside and get creative writing done and research done and recording done. But I think all of you can empathize with that reality of when we were all in the pandemic, the last thing we really wanted to do was sit down and learn French or work on a passion project. We just kind of wanted to just persist. And so now that the pandemic, I dare say, is winding up, or at least that new normals are becoming more stable, I said, no, it's really time to double down and to work on the podcast. I haven't put out episodes really at all this past year. I've done like 3, maybe. But it's still a project. It's still a educational and speaking and a tool and a creative outlet for me that I really love. But in a lot of ways, doing these Wednesday reflections is that creative outlet expressed in a different avenue. And writing sermons is that creative outlet expressed in that way. And so, in a lot of ways, my professional job is scratching the itch that the that prompted the podcast in the first place. All right, so that's the backstory. I will also say that it is much more difficult for me to do a Lenten discipline if I'm adding something on. Excuse me, I don't know why I'm yawning so much. Anyway, a lot of times when we hear about Lenten disciplines, the first thing we think about is giving something up. Giving up a particular favorite food or an activity or a beverage or a dessert or whatever it might be. I think those are easier for me to do. It's easier for me to give up meat, for example, than it is to take on an extra 15 minutes of prayer every day, for example. I know that I'm just going to kick that can down the curb instead of a dietary restriction, which, even though giving up meat for Lent is a large choice, because it does affect a lot of what you do and how you interact with other people at the table, it is a bigger, I would say, discipline. But it's much easier for me to pay attention to something as physical as, don't eat that steak. Instead, eat that, tempeh stir fry or whatever. Now, adding on extra creative work with the podcast. I did things that were in the atmosphere of the podcast. I learned a lot about YouTube video editing, kind of thinking I was going to maybe make more videos for the Church Nerd. And I got to make more, and I started working on finishing up scripts for episodes that I had previously written, but had been too, I guess, afraid to finish. That kind of fear of failure, that procrastination coming out. And so I've been sitting on half-finished work, and thought, well, this is the time I'm going to make myself do it, because if I can make myself do something, it's usually during Lent. And then I just really haven't done that. Again, it's that fear of failure, that procrastination that makes it so much easier to just go ahead and not do it. And again, Lent isn't measured in success as far as, excuse me. Lent isn't a measure of success as far as how you've done with your discipline. And so I whine about my failure to live up to my expectation of what my Lenten discipline would look like, and the output, the product output how that would look in my mind when I first thought, like, oh, hey, I could get this done as a part of my Lenten journey. And in my head, I was, putting out episodes every week. We're now coming up to our 4th week in Lent. I've done none. And so I consider myself struggling with this discipline. And maybe you are struggling with your discipline. Maybe you did something like, I'm going to give up chocolate, but then you didn't do so well. Or what is often said is, well, Sundays in Lent are not Sundays of Lent. They're celebrations, they're feast days in and of themselves, which is true. So if you gave up chocolate, you can have chocolate on Sunday. And some people kind of scoff at that. I have no problem with it. I mean, I think if you're doing a good job, go for it. Don't overindulge it. Don't eat a week's worth of chocolate on Sunday just because you gave it up the week before. But go ahead and have a couple pieces. You're fine. If you gave up Dr. Pepper, have one. Be great. But don't rag yourself. Don't hate yourself. Don't shame yourself because your discipline isn't necessarily going well. Because the whole purpose of the discipline is to be a reminder, the string tied on your finger of God's presence in your life. So do I feel that I've been pretty good about reminding myself about God's presence in my actions and in my thoughts this Lenten season? Yeah, I think I've done a pretty good job with that. I also think that's kind of inherent in my job. And so I'm doing a lot of that introspection as a part of my daily work routine. And so that's what that is. But if you are struggling with your Lenten discipline, don't freak out. Don't worry about it. Maybe next year you will have, given yourself some feedback from this year, and next year you'll choose a way of doing a discipline that will challenge you and speak to you in a way you want it to. You'll get that I guess the outcome you kind of want to have, that idealized version of like, oh, I'm going to be so in tune with God after I do this particular discipline. Because, guys, our lives aren't Instagram posts. They're not perfect. And we don't have to pretend that we're perfect in everything that we do. We are imperfect people, and living into that is kind of the deal, kind of the reason of Lent in the first place. Sorry, the thing is beeping. But so, all that to say, I've talked about giving up meat for Lent. I think that's my most successful type of discipline, only because it's very present and it's very physical and actual. So if you are struggling with your Lenten discipline this year, change what you're going to do next time. And if you falter or if you stumble, just say, God, I realize this is a reason that I'm going to have to pray a little harder or pray a little more. Give me some strength and help me do this. And that is exactly the purpose of a discipline. You're supposed to kind of struggle and fail with it. If you pick something that was far too easy, then you haven't really stretched yourself. And you pick something that was too hard, maybe cut yourself a break and find a way to weave in something more manageable. Anyway, that's my reflection for today. I hope this day finds you well. Don't forget to come to our final Lenten supper tonight at 6 o'clock in Cannon Hall. And as always, dear ones, God bless.